Meet MojoPix, a Santa Monica-based startup that is hoping to change the way you deal with photos taken with your smartphone. It all starts with a great idea, and MojoPix has got that. Now they're looking for that big breakthrough that will take them to the next level.
Welcome to Concept to Code. Today we're talking about web development, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Now, Colin, obviously you're building a mobile app, but you have a landing page. What questions do you have about web development?
Sure, Gary. I have two big questions. The one is, does HTML5 make Adobe Flash obsolete now? And the other question I'm wondering about is the platform. I have the landing page built on a WordPress platform, but I'm wondering if there's any other options out there I might want to consider moving forward.
Okay, both great questions. When we return, we have our special guest. He's a legend in the coding world. He's going to teach us about coding. So stay tuned.
Welcome to Concept to Code, where you'll learn from the experts who are making Santa Monica a hotbed of technological innovation. Here to learn from our experts is MojoPix, a Santa Monica startup that wants to help you make the most of the photos you take with your phone. The experts are here. MojoPix is here. All on Concept to Code.
Today is all about coding. We're talking stacks today. Lamp stacks, mean stacks. If you know what that means and can code it, you'll probably have stacks of job offers. To teach us more about coding, we have a local legend here today, Jeff Dickey, who is the CLI engineer at Heroku, a division of Salesforce. He was previously a web development instructor right over at General Assembly and has over 10 years of experience as a full-stack web developer. He's one of the top 100 open source developers in LA. Jeff is also the author of Write Modern Web Apps with the Mean Stack and has studied computer science at Oregon State University. After you hear his presentation, you'll have a greater appreciation for your technical co-founder. Please welcome our guest mentor, Jeff Dickey. Thanks for being here, Jeff.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. You know, what I love most about software development is how fast the industry is always changing. There's always something new to learn. So I want to take a little bit of time and show you guys a little bit how I build apps today. Example, HTML5 Web App. It's a simple guessing game to let the user guess a number between 1 and 10. If I guess the number 3, we get too low. If I guess the number 6, we get the right answer. HTML5 web apps like this are the most common type of programming done today. Anything you use through a web browser, whether it's on a desktop, Safari on iPhone, Chrome on Android, is built with HTML5. I built this app using a website called CodePen. CodePen is a free app that allows you to build HTML5 web apps right in the browser. Notably, this app could be built with many alternative tools, including just a simple text editor. HTML5 web apps are built with 3 different languages: HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. All HTML5 web apps use just these 3 languages. HTML is a markup language that describes the content of a web page. Now, content might include text, images, or links to other pages. As of HTML5, it can even play video and audio. It's really the backbone of an application, and it describes the structure of a page. It stands for Hypertext Markup Language, but it's never referred to by the full name, just like a lot of things in software. CSS, or Cascading Style Sheets, describes the visual design of a page. CSS defines what colors are used on a page, the fonts, the font size, borders. It can even describe things like gradients, shadows, animation, and transition effects. Now the JavaScript, this is where the actual code and application goes. In this game, this is the code that says what happens when the user clicks the guess button, what happens if they guess the right number, and it updates the help accordingly. This is where HTML5 programs will spend most of their time. If you'd like to use CodePen to build a similar app, just go to codepen.io and click on New Pen. In the first section, I'll be building HTML and CSS for the application to create a non-functional mockup. To begin, I'll start with the structure of the app and write all the HTML. HTML is made up of tags. A tag has 3 parts: a beginning, a middle, and a closing tag. This is a H1 or header tag. It's used to title pages. The other type of header tags, H1, H2, all the way through H6. As the number increases, the text gets smaller. So if I change this to H3, you can see that the text will shrink. Now let's add a P or paragraph tag for the help text. And we'll add an input tag, which will be the text field for the user to enter their guess. And we'll put a button on the page that says guess, and this will be what the user clicks when they think they have the right answer. HTML is now complete, but doesn't look very pretty. Let's add some color and personality to the game with CSS. First, I'll put a more interesting background color on the page. I can do this by setting the background color of the body tag. And I'm going to use a shade of purple here. Now that looks good, but the text's hard to read against that dark background, so I'll change the text to be white. Note that I can use either spelling out the name of the color or the hash code. I don't like that default font, so I'm going to change that to Helvetica. The help text looks a little bold, so I'm going to change the P tag to use a thinner font. Now I'll dress up that guest button by customizing how it looks. First I'll give it a red background color. And note what happened when I did that. It switched from that OS X default button style to this totally different and totally ugly style. This one, though, I can customize. For example, I can make the text white. I can give it a subtle border to make it stand out a little bit. This is a little lighter red color. And I can give it a little padding to make the text breathe a little bit. And I'll set the width to be quite a bit larger so it looks like something the user really wants to click on. A little border radius will soften the edges. But now after I've done all this, if I click on it, you'll see it adds this really weird outline. Can remove that just by setting outline 0. And that'll get rid of it. But now it's really hard to tell if the user clicked the button, and this is bad for accessibility reasons. So if you ever remove the outline, what you need to do is you need to add an active state to the button. So we'll say button and the active state. And the active state is when the button's actively being clicked. So what I can do is I can make the background a really dark red. And now if I click it, you'll see it turns into this really dark red. And that looks okay, but what I'd like is for it to fade in and out. And we can use the Css Transitions to achieve this pretty easily. We just say on the button element, we'll set the transition. Anytime the background color changes, do it over 500 milliseconds, which is a long time, but it looks good for when you're in dev because you can see exactly how it looks. We'll reduce that down a little bit now that we see it's working. Now I'd like to make this button three-dimensional. To do that, I can use a little trick with box shadow. Box shadow is a CSS property we use to add shadows to element. To get an idea how it works, first I'll add a real typical looking shadow to the button. So we'll say box shadow, shadow of 10 pixels to the right, 5 pixels down, 8 pixels of blur, and it'll be black. So now you can see that's a pretty typical shadow effect, but if I set the blur to 0, then you'll see this just adds a silhouette of the element down and to the right. And if I take out the right 10 pixel offset, then what you see is it goes directly underneath. And finally, if I set this color to be a little bit darker than the background color of the element, then you'll see it kind of has this 3D effect and it looks like it's the bottom side of the button. Now that the button looks 3D, let's add some transitions to it so it moves down the page just like a button in the real world. So as you can see right now, it just has that background color effect, nothing else. So to do that, first what I'm going to do is I'm going to shrink this offset a little bit so it looks like the button's actually getting smaller when you click it. And I'm just going to reduce this down to 3 pixels, so it'll just be reduced by, well, I'll do 2. So now you can see it's shrinking there, but it's happening really fast because it's not under that same transition property the background is. So I'll change this transition to all, and what that says is do a transition on any property change, not just background color. And just like we kind of did before while we're developing on this, I'm going to increase the transition time to 500 milliseconds. And that way it's really obvious to see what's changing. So now you can see it really shrinking. And that looks pretty good, but it still doesn't look like a button press, because in a real button, this top would go down, right? Where it says guess would go down, because that's where the user would be pushing. And the bottom would stay in the same place, since that's where it would be like on the panel, wherever the button would be in the real world. So to fix that, what I need to do is I need to push the button down the same 3 pixels that I'm shrinking it. So to do that, what I can do is I can use something called position relative. And what position relative does is it allows you to set where the element is in reference to where it would have been before. So to do that, I'll add position relative to the element. And then on the active state, what I'm going to say is I'm going to say top 3 pixels. And this will push the button down 3 pixels based on where it would have been when it's in the active state. So now you can see it's actually going down, it's being pressed, but just like the box shadow, it doesn't have the same transition effect. The reason for that is the top hasn't been changed. It's only been set under active. It doesn't get set under button. And the transition will only animate changes. So to fix that, I can just set this to be top 0, which effectively does nothing except it tells the browser that it has to animate that. So now if I push it, you can see it looks like a nice button press. And if I reduce the time, then it looks like you're really pushing a button. So the last thing I'd like to do with the CSS is I'd like to have the pointer cursor when you're hovering over this, so the user knows that that's a link that they can click on. So to do that's very easy. Just say cursor, pointer, and now as you hover over it, it will change accordingly. So now our mockup's done. It's ready for the user to put a number in and make a guess, but it doesn't function. And that's because we need to fill in our last section here, which is the JavaScript. And that'll be in the next section.
I hope that was a useful introduction into HTML and CSS. Later we'll look at finishing the game by adding some JavaScript in and making it function.
Well, Jeff, that was a great code session, but we need to take a break. I need a coffee. You may need a coffee. When we return, Jeff's going to walk us through the second half of his presentation. Stay with us. Santa Monica is in a perpetual state of innovation. At the center of it all is the entrepreneur, giving to the ecosystem and being fueled by it. But what exactly fuels the entrepreneur?
The reason why we moved to Santa Monica was to get access to the great talent pool that is in the city.
What inspires us is the weather, the ocean, the people, and the city itself.
Both Mitch and I like to surf every morning.
A great way to start the day.
One of my favorite things to do, come out here, bring my laptop, connect to what is a choice Wi-Fi connection.
I am one of the few lucky people I know that gets to ride my bike to the office.
The city is always finding new and innovative ways to make it an incredible place to both live and work in.
It's great to be in the middle of that action and being able to just tap into what Santa Monica has to offer.
I am the admissions manager for General Assembly.
I work for a local company, Lionsgate Entertainment.
I'm the Santa Monica's Youth Technology Program Coordinator.
I'm the IT manager for the Lowe's Santa Monica Beach Hotel. I'm the COO and co-founder of Callfire.
I'm the founder of Favorite.
I'm the founder of Down to Earth Media.
We are a tech company. Our internet connection is very important to us.
And CityNet was really crucial in our initial growth.
And a rock-solid service, one of our top providers for connectivity.
The internet's not affected at all. We have great gigabit speed. We bring 30 or more students to these co-working spaces.
And they have come through with speeds that throw all their competition in the dust.
Seeing the evolution of a startup, implementing a new idea that's going to have a positive impact on society, it never gets old.
MojoPix is a Santa Monica startup that is going to change the way you use the photos you take with your phone. They are here today on Concept to Code to listen and learn from the experts about how to take their next big step forward.
Welcome back. We're coding HTML, CSS, and JavaScript today with Jeff Dickey. Jeff, let's keep going.
Sure. Right. JavaScript is the top language in the world right now, and knowing it can be really useful in a lot of different domains. Here we're going to take a look to see how to integrate it into a game.
In the last video, we looked at how to build the HTML and CSS for this HTML5 guessing game app. The HTML here describes a structure. That includes the text, input, buttons, and general layout of the app. The CSS describes the visual parts of the app, That includes the font, colors, and spacing between the elements, but it also includes the transition effects we see if we click the guess button. HTML and CSS are not actually code. They're languages, but you can't actually program something in either of them, aside from maybe some hacks. To make the game function, we need to add JavaScript. JavaScript is the programming language used on the web. That's not being extreme. It is the only language that can be used inside of a browser. For this reason, JavaScript is the most popular language in the world. JavaScript was developed way back in 1995 as a scripting language for the Netscape web browser. For years, it wasn't used much and was considered a toy language up until about 2004. At that time, Google began using it to develop apps like Gmail and Google Maps that were way more interactive than the web applications that came before them. From then on, everybody wanted to build great JavaScript applications. Later, more advancements were made with JavaScript, such as Google releasing Chrome with the V8 JavaScript engine. Before V8, JavaScript was really slow and it was really hard to write complex applications because they would just be too slow to use. But today, JavaScript is considered a serious language that's being used in many places, not just on the web, but also in servers and in mobile and embedded devices. When writing JavaScript, you'll find the developer tool console is your best friend. The console allows you to output simple text to test bits of code out before hooking it up to the HTML elements in the UI. In Chrome, you open the console by clicking the hamburger icon, clicking on More Tools, and going to JavaScript Console. Other browsers will be a little different to open the console, but every modern browser has a console for developing JavaScript. Now I can use console.log in the JavaScript to print some text out onto the screen. And you'll see it appear in the console down here. Now I got the other hello because every time you make a change, it's going to try and run the code. Some developers like to end their JavaScript in semicolons, but I prefer not to because they're optional. Now, to write the game, first what I'll do is I'll get the game to work just here in the console, and then I'll integrate it into the HTML elements. I need to be able to check if a guess number is the same as the answer. So to do that, first what I'm going to do is just store the number 4 in this answer variable. The equals here reads as becomes. So you say answer becomes 4. It doesn't mean equals. The single equals never means that. It just sets the answer to be 4. When developing, it's really useful to hard code the answer like this to just like 4, rather than try and randomize or anything. We'll need the randomization later, but it gets really hard to debug if you don't know what the original number is. So now I'll put in a guess number and see if they're equal. So I'll say var guess becomes 4, and now we'll do what's called a conditional or an if statement. So I'll say if the guess is equal to answer, then I'm going to console log out correct. Now the double equals does mean is equal to, and this correct is only going to get run if this predicate here is true. So the equals and the single equals and double equals are very different things. One checks to see if two things are equal, the other one just sets something. So with this, you see correct has now appeared down below because these two numbers are equal. But if I change this to 2, then we get no output at all. So to improve this a bit, what I'd like to do is check to see if the guess is not equal to the answer. And in this case, I'll say console.log wrong. And now we see wrong has popped up. So if I change this to 3, we see wrong again. If I change it to 4, then we see correct. But we can improve this more by checking to see if the guess is less than the answer, then we want to say it was too low, and if the guess was greater, we want to say it was too high. So rather than just do the not equals, I'm going to change this to be if guess is less than the answer, I'm going to say too low, and I'll have a new conditional. And here I'll console.log out too high. Now I'm almost able to play the game, but only in the console. So I'll need to hook the JavaScript up to the UI, and for that I'll need to use a library called jQuery to interact with the HTML elements. I can include jQuery by clicking the gear icon and selecting jQuery. as a library I want to import. If you're using a different editor, you have to add jQuery to the HTML probably. But with jQuery, I can attach the click event on the guest button down here. So if I say jQuery button, what that's going to do is it's going to select the button using the same CSS selectors that we use for the CSS. And I can say, when it's clicked, run this new anonymous function. And I'll say console.log clicked. So now, if I go down here and I click clicked, then that runs. Now this whole block here might look like a bit of a handful. What's happening is I say, select the button, and when it's clicked, run this new function. And so this block of code, this line 17, anything around it, is going to get executed every time it's clicked. So what I want to do now is, rather than just print out clicked, I'd like to print out whatever the user's guess was, right? It's good when you're programming to just do a little bit at a time. Rather than me trying to finish everything all at once, I'm just going to do a little bit, print it to the console, and see if it's working. So what I'm going to do is get a new variable guess. I'm going to put inside of that the whatever was in the text field. So I can get that by using jQuery to select the input field and calling val on that. Then I can change this console.log to say you guessed, and we can concatenate that with the guess the user had. So now if I go down here, I put in 4, click guess, then down here we see you guessed 4. So now I can move that logic that we had before up here down here, and without any changes of the code, it should be working. I get rid of this variable I don't need anymore. And so because I reuse that variable name here, all this stuff still applies, right? We're going to get the guess of whatever the user punched in. The answer is still going to be 4, and it should correspond with whatever the user did correctly or incorrectly. So if I say 5, we should see too high. If I see 3, we see too low. And if I say 4, it's going to be correct. So game's working now. It's not printing out to the screen, just the console, but we're doing one step at a time. We've got the input working. Now we just need to get the output to display to the user correctly. So to do that, what I'm going to do is change these console.logs to instead use jQuery to grab the p tag, remember, because that's what the help, this guess a number is here. And close this up a little bit. And just set the text on that to say correct. And just to see if that's working, I'm going to say 4, and we get correct. So now if I just copy this code, put it into these couple lines here, make this one say too low, and make this one say too high, then too low, too high, correct. We can get rid of our console logs, so we don't need those anymore. So now all that's working, but one thing we should do to finish this up is make the answer actually random. And for that, what we can do is say math.random. But math.random doesn't return a number between 1 and 10, it returns a number between 0 and 1. And you can see this if I console log the answer out right when it loads. And you'll see it's just some random number. But if I multiply this by 10, then we do get a number between 1 and 10, but it has the user's never going to guess 4.03 or whatever. So to do that, I can just round it off with the ceil function, and this will just move it up 1, right? So we want to move up because otherwise it would be 0 through 9, but if we move up, it'll be 1 through 10. So now we see the answer is 1. So if I say 4 too low, we get it just reloaded because I got rid of the console logs. So that 1's from the old one, but we can still play the game. Get too low, too low, too low. So it's 9. So say 10 would be too high, and it works.
I hope you found that a useful introduction to JavaScript. If you want to check out more, I'd go to codeacademy.com. It's a great place to take lessons on learning more about JavaScript and other tools in the web.
Jeff, great presentation on coding. You may have inspired some technical co-founders out there. I know they're in short supply. Speaking of which, what got you into coding?
Well, it's a little bit surprising because I grew up on a farm up in Oregon, so I think when I was a kid, probably the last place people thought I would be writing software. But I was really into video games, like a lot of kids are, and that slowly led into me being interested in how to build them myself. And then later it was just the problem-solving nature of software. I just couldn't get enough of it.
Cool. Well, I know Colin has some concerns, so let's talk about problem-solving with Colin's questions.
Sure. So my question for you is, the current landing page is built on WordPress. I'm wondering if moving forward there might be some other platforms I should consider.
Yeah, so WordPress is a web framework that was really popular in 2004 that made it easy for apps to really get fast up and off the ground. But nowadays we have a lot better tools. Things like Rails, Ruby on Rails, for example, really allows a lot more flexibility in building an application. So, and a lot of developers, good developers, they like flexibility. They like tools that they can do a lot of stuff with. And WordPress can be pretty limiting because it's really just designed to be a blog engine.
Great. Well, thank you, Jeff Dickey, Heroku, for joining us today for coding, and Colin Vincent again with Mojo Picks. Come back next time for more Concept to Code.